Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously fascinating journey straight into the heart of design and technology. We're going to be exploring some incredible research by Sofia Lara Morosi and Federico Del Giorgia Solfa to deconstruct a word we hear literally every single day, a word that honestly might just be trapping us in a box. So let's dive right in and look at how the products we use actually view us.
So what is a user, really? Think about it for a second. Have you ever picked up a new gadget, used a digital service, or maybe even sat in a newly designed chair and just felt like it wasn't quite made for a real living, breathing person? Like it was designed for some imagined stereotype rather than for you? Well, you absolutely aren't alone. And this brings us to the core problem we're unpacking today, the very concept of the user in the design process, and how that single simple word shapes our entire material world.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the myth of the ideal user. To understand how we became reduced to mere users, we actually have to go back in time to where it all started. Back in the 1960s, at the famous Ulm School of Design, visionaries like Guy Bon-Cipé and thinkers like Christopher Alexander were trying to totally transform design. They wanted to take it from being this intuitive art form and turn it into an exact deductive science, one rooted entirely in math and logic. By 1964, Bon-Cipé was describing design as an information treatment system. It was all about Cartesian logic, right? Just breaking down really complex problems into small, manageable scientific parts. It actually wasn't until the 1980s that a massive paradigm shift happened with movements like New Design. They challenged this rigid scientific view and paved the way for the modern transition design era that we're talking about today.
But that early 1960s scientific approach, it actually defined you and me. The traditional user was seen as nothing more than a passive receiver sitting at the end of an industrial assembly line. To solve a material problem, designers used a deductive method. They basically took complex human beings and fragmented them into flat data points. We became a segmented, non-participatory group defined entirely by basic demographic categories like age, gender, and location.
Which brings us right to Section 2. The stereotype.
Here's the thing. The scientific method kind of hits a brick wall when you apply it to messy, complex human beings. This rigid, rationalist tradition of treating people as fragmented data points comes with some really severe, real-world consequences. Designers slice up the market like a pie, segmenting us by gender, by age, by social group. But this cookie-cutter approach is incredibly restrictive. For one, it completely ignores cultural context. It assumes that you, the user, exhibit entirely passive behavior. It assumes you just sit there and accept the product exactly as intended. By stripping away your unique context in your culture, designers aren't just solving a problem. They're actually imposing a highly restricted version of reality onto you.
The authors of our source paper hit the nail on the head here. They point out that as a simplifying model, this approach carries the massive risk of generating stereotypes. When we're reduced to just our age bracket or our zip code, we basically lose our humanity in the eyes of the product. We become a stereotype, a caricature of a person, rather than an active participant in our own environment.
Let's move on to Section 3, designing our own reality.
Thankfully, there's a really powerful shift happening right now. We are moving away from this trap and stepping into the realm of ontological design, which recognizes that design is actually a two-way street. Now I know, ontological design sounds like some heavy academic jargon, but honestly, it's a beautiful concept. Based on the work of scholars like Winograd and Flores, it's the principle that we aren't just designing objects, we are actually designing ways of being. Every single piece of technology, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, proposes a set of rituals. It dictates how we act, how we interact, and ultimately, how we exist in the world.
Arturo Escobar puts it so perfectly. He says, "When we design tools, we design the conditions of our existence." That should really give us all pause, right? Because if the tools we use every single day are built on reductive stereotypes and unsustainable techno-rationalist models, then they are actively trapping us in a restrictive and unsustainable existence. We are both the designers and the designed.
So,
Looking at the contrast, the old traditional approach is deductive, it's rational, and it definitely relies on stereotyping. It leans on this techno-rationalist self, completely isolating the designer from the passive user. But the ontological approach, it's inductive and holistic. It actively looks for a rupture in the old paradigms to break the cycle of unsustainability. It goes way beyond the strict labels of subject and object, focusing instead on transition, moving our society toward a more connected, sustainable future where context actually matters.
All right, Section 4, Technologies for Inclusion.
So how do we practically apply this holistic view? Well, modern Latin American sociology and design are offering a really groundbreaking way out of the stereotype trap. But we have to start with this bold, undeniable truth. Technologies are not neutral, ever. They are never just objective tools. They directly and indirectly modify social relations. A product is always an active social, political, and economic construct. The moment we realize a tool has political and cultural weight, we can actually start designing it to lift people up rather than box them in.
And this realization gives birth to TEAS, Technologies for Inclusive Sustainable Development. This framework deliberately aims to generate social inclusion and sustainable dynamics. Thinkers and researchers, like those using the socio-technical analysis methodology developed at the National University of Quilmes, use this exact framework to view technology differently. They don't see it as a way to make a quick profit off a demographic, but as a collaborative tool designed specifically to solve complex social and environmental problems.
Which leads us right into Section 5, Relevant Social Groups, or GSR.
This brings us to the ultimate solution to the myth of the user. If we aren't just users, then what are we? Well, we're part of relevant social groups. Drawing on the concepts of Pinch and Bisher, a GSR recognizes that it's not just some isolated end user who matters. A relevant social group is made up of all the actors and institutions that assign a specific meaning to a technology. It completely shifts the focus. It means everyone who has a stake in a technology's success or failure, whether they're the person holding the tool, the community impacted by its creation, or the institutions governing it, they all actually influence the final design. This builds a completely new reality. Think of it as a socio-technical alliance. While the traditional user is a passive, isolated consumer defined just by demographics, the relevant social group is incredibly active. Here, people actively assign meaning to the product. They are part of a massive coalition of institutions, politicians, and culture. And this shows that real product success doesn't depend on targeting a single demographic stereotype. It depends on navigating a complex, living web of cultural and political forces.
The big takeaway here is that by moving away from the simplistic, rationalist label of the user, designers can finally step out of the stereotype trap. They can begin to truly understand the real cultural needs, the lived experiences, and the specific contexts of the people they are designing for. We're not just a collection of data points waiting to be marketed to. We're active participants in the design of our own reality.
And that leaves us with this final, provocative thought. The very next time you pick up your phone, use an app, or interact with literally any piece of technology, ask yourself, are you allowing yourself to be treated as just a user, neatly boxed into a stereotype? Or will you recognize your immense power within the socio-technical network as an active participant, helping to shape the sustainable and inclusive products of the future? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions and never forget that you help design the world you live in.